Sim racing is a fascinating hobby. It's vast with plenty to do, many things to experience, and many ways to experience them. If there's a hobby that could be disposable income made manifest like a succulent Chinese meal, it's this one. Though, with all of the money being spent in top-of-the-line, high-tier equipment and the amount of flame wars in the comment sections of which sim racing title is the best boy, there's always this thing in the back of my head that never quite made sense about our ego-measuring championship of a hobby. In reality, this is a video that probably should have been done a long time ago, and it's probably gonna be my hottest take ever. Get ready for it? Fuck realism. You can yell at the screen now as much as you like, just don't forget to subscribe. What I'm saying though is not what you think it is. I'm not asking for arcade or simcade handling. If you stop the video here and take that conclusion from the video, it won't be correct. Regardless, this is a conversation we really need to have in sim racing and urgently. Anyways, let's take a step back. I'm going to ask you guys a question. Which video do you think it's the most important video ever made about sim racing? Maybe some review video or a guide video or field of view setups to avoid the FOV police, or the perfect run. In my opinion, this is the one. It's Realism. I love racing games, they suck. It's a wonderful video released a few years back, and you should go watch it, it's amazing. In this video, he breaks down not only arcade racing games and how the genre is beyond stale, but also gripes with sim racing titles and why it has a lot of problems. From the ground up! Some of the criticism, actually most of the criticism in my opinion, still stands today. If Realism can get it, why can't we? Having watched some titles detonate live and reading a lot of comments out there about sim racing from non-sim racers and sim racers alike got me thinking, what is really the issue regarding sim racing titles? Why do they often just feel clunky? Like there was no love given to the user experience, so the user can experience some love and give it back to the sim, or something like that. Well, after some thought, I figured it could be something like this. The mindless pursuit for ever more realistic physics, which most of the time don't really deliver anything substantially different or even improve the driving experience for most of all, at the expense of everything else that is required to make a title compelling to use, is setting back sim racing. Racing physics development is really hard. It could be argued that those who developed these physics are not too far away from mad scientists or alchemists. It's time-consuming, it's money-consuming, it requires leaps of faith due to sometimes lack of correct information, and then at the end of the day, every single part of the physics set needs to work together to provide a coherent experience that is reasonably correct and accurate. Now, you may argue in the comments which sim has it best, and you really should do that because, the engagement helps a lot the channel, but at the end of the day, the law of diminishing returns starts to kick in, and in this case, it's probably as hit it collectively with all of the sims when Baby Shark was released. So, essentially, it's nice to have better physics, but does that really matter after a certain point? In a previous video, I have argued that iRacing, despite all its flaws, and it has so many of them, has the focus just in the right places to make up for its problems and keep having its community back for more, even though some of the issues can be quite race-breaking. In the same vein, I've argued that Le Mans Ultimate got better, not because of the physics set that came with the last update. So I think that the relentless pursuit of hyper-realistic physics has started to work against the very interests of sim racers, and I also believe the future of sim racing itself. And what I mean by this is developers using countless hours into refining tire models, tweaking force feedback calculations, and simulating the most minuscule real-world driver dynamics probably is not the best use of times when other things may be needed and more urgent. While realism is of course the key pillar of sim racing, this singular focus comes at the costs. Essential features that actually impact user experience, such as user interface improvements, or stability, or multiplayer reliability, and generally quality of life updates, are often neglected or outright ignored for years. How many times have you needed to navigate outdated, slow, or clunky interfaces just to start a race? Or how often do online racers suffer from connection instability or desync issues, and I'm looking at UI racing, or lack of proper matchmaking services that require you to use third-party applications, and then your sim doesn't reach the potential it should have gotten. These are problems that directly affect every single player, yet often they take a backseat in development because physics refinement, or new content, is prioritized above all else. Don't we know sims like this? In my opinion, when a game spends years perfecting its tire model but still lacks intuitive user interface or a solid ranking system or generally a bug-free experience as much as you can get, it really alienates the very people it's supposed to serve, or at the very least, it gives a bad impression, oftentimes the wrong one too, to possible newcomers looking into our expensive hobby. This overemphasis, and I really mean overemphasis on physics, also raises the barrier to entry for new players, because instead of making a sim racing more welcoming and engaging, and I don't mean making the physics simpler or easier, it becomes really an exclusive club for only the sweaty boys that are willing to overlook all of the other shortcomings that makes the sim annoying. Because at the end of the day, sim racing really needs more than just perfect physics. It needs to be enjoyable, accessible, and functional. It needs to be, usable software that people can actually use and enjoy using besides, the core thing. Is it so hard to ask having working software in this economy? At some point, I think developers need to ask, who are they making these sims for? If the answer is the players in general that really want to have a sim racing game, then it's time to balance physics development with the improvements that actually enhance the overall experience. Otherwise, sim racing risks driving itself into a wall of its own making, because if you are making these sims to those who are willing to go through the pitfalls of a good sim but not very good software, I suspect we are never going to have much more than what we have now as a hobby, because it really gets annoying to everybody else. Then again, I've always had this idea that if supposedly some hardcore sim racing title received adapted Gran Turismo 7 physics, the hardcore fans would say it would be the best, most accurate thing ever. Even when there are actually physics shortcomings, the community, and I'm using air quotes here, will always say it's perfect now. Ironically, much of this problem is actually fueled by the sim racing community itself. Hardcore enthusiasts often demand ever more precise and detailed physics, sometimes at the expense of broader gameplay improvements, and online discussions and forums frequently criticize any attempt to simplify or streamline aspects of a sim racing title, reinforcing the idea that physics must always be the top priority, often attacking those that want some focus in improving the user experience or stability. Things that don't make us throw a keyboard at the screen out of sheer frustration. This creates a feedback loop where developers feel pressured to chase absolute realism, whatever that is, instead of delivering a well-rounded product because they think the community at large wants that. It's almost like a self-inflicted wound. The community-driven push for hyperrealism can also alienate newcomers, as experienced players champion complex physics as the ultimate measure of Sims quality, and the result of this, a scene that can feel unwelcoming and overly technical, making it harder for casual players to find enjoyment because it's incredibly hard to even get started, let alone deal with the rest of the bullshit that sometimes we need to endure. So, by fixating on the most minor physics details, the community sometimes overlooks the bigger picture. And we need to ensure that sim racing remains a fun and a sustainable genre for all, and not just a circle jerk for pretend race car drivers. As a personal note, of all the sim racing titles at the moment, the one that I dislike to drive most intensely, at least in the classes that I like to race the most, it is iRacing. And yet, its appeal, it is absolutely undeniable because part of the focus is to improve the user experience and the game loop together, so they can focus and justify the other part, which is take $15 out of every piece of content. Remember, they do it because they can. There's really no competition at the moment. If they couldn't, they wouldn't. As a community, we can start by broadening our perspective on what makes a great sim racing experience. In reality, we need to ignore super focused physics development for a bit because most of the sims do the sim and the race part of sim racing quite well. Fixing some of the issues of physics that appear, sure, it should be done, but don't overfixate on this. We need to understand that first and foremost, sim racing is a software, and if the software part sucks, well, nobody will care about it. So instead of demanding every more complex physics, we should also advocate for improvements in usability, stability, and multiplayer features. Developers in turn should engage more with a wider player base to understand what truly enhances the experience beyond just the realism. By understanding this, sim racing can continue to evolve beyond the bullshit of fixating in a race physics arms race and actually start to become software that people want to engage with and ultimately race on. Sim racing titles are games. Games are software. Don't make them frustrating to use. And thank you very much for watching my TED Talk.